as I understand it, the proposal of the Polish government is to introduce formal education in school for 6-year-olds, and also in the last year of the kindergarten, also 5-year-olds will be starting to be taught formally. Whereas previously Polish children under 7 years attended your excellent kindergartens, which, as they should, introduced young children to their educational experience using a very play-based pedagogy. And in some ways I should reassure you that the Polish government is not alone in this. They're not being uniquely difficult, because in many advanced countries within the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which represents all the richest countries in the world, including Poland, there is considerable concern at that same trend happening in many countries, and it's been termed the schoolification of early childhood education. So this is the essential question. I do research in developmental psychology and educational psychology. So what's the evidence? Is an earlier start to formal schooling likely to lead to improved educational outcomes, as presumably the Polish government are claiming? And so to do that, I'm going to review the international context, what's happening in different countries, and what evidence we have. What scientific evidence do we have about school starting age, what difference that can make, the evidence regarding learning through play, which of course happens at kindergarten, and then draw some conclusions from that evidence. Okay, so let's start by looking at the international context. It's certainly true that in most countries, children start school having been to kindergarten before, either at 6 or 7 years of age. There is an international trend, particularly in Europe, of governments lowering the school starting age and imposing increasingly formal curricula in the early years of schooling. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, the government, different governments actually over a number of years, have espoused the idea that the earlier the better, that the earlier children start school, the better for their education. And this has been associated in the UK and in many other countries with an increased emphasis on testing young children to make sure that these improved standards are being met. So in the UK, the children start very young anyway. They start when they're 5, and in practice actually they're 4 when they go into school. And the government have introduced all kinds of early testing. So we have a phonics test for 6-year-olds at the end of year 1, and we have a new test, a baseline assessment, being introduced when children as 4-year-olds enter what we call the reception classroom. And in the United States, they've introduced an early years curriculum called the Common Core, and there are Common Core state standards, so that now formal literacy skills are being taught in kindergarten to 5-year-olds rather than in first grade to 6-year-olds as previously. And what's interesting is in that both in the UK and in the USA there are similar parental groups protesting, as you have in Poland, happily, because the parents are seeing the effects of these changes on their young children, and they don't like what they see. So what are their arguments? What's the case that is being made that earlier is better, that starting young children on formal education at an earlier age is likely to improve educational standards? Well, there seem to be 4 kind of main arguments. that an early start provides an opportunity for children, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, to make up the deficit in their academic skills. The early school starting age is popular amongst parents, maybe it is with some. Children can get a head start in learning, and that young children are able to acquire more cognitive skills inherent in the formal curriculum, which are not available through a play-based curriculum. The problem, however, with this with the position that your government are taking, and the position being taken in the UK and in the USA and in many other European countries, is that actually there's no evidence for those claims, whereas there is a huge body of evidence suggesting that those things are not the case. So here are just two of a number of studies that have looked at international comparisons. The first one is a study run in the United Kingdom by the National Foundation for Educational Research, which is a large independent research organisation. And as you can see, they found no evidence for an optimum age for children starting school. They found that starting formal schools earlier gave no long-term educational benefit. The only difference they could find, consequence they could find of lowering the school leaving age, was an increase in anxiety and a negative impact on children's self-esteem and motivation to learn. Okay, and another study by Sugate analysed the 2006 data from the PISA studies, which is the premier body that does international comparisons of educational achievement, and they do this by running tests with 15-year-olds. So in this case, they looked at the 15-year-old students in 55 different countries, and they controlled for social and economic differences. They found no significant association between reading achievement, for example, and school entry age, and concluded that an earlier beginning in formal reading instruction did not result in higher reading achievement by the age of 15. There are other studies actually within countries, so here are just a couple of examples. I won't go into detail, but a New Zealand study comparing children starting to learn to read at 5 and starting to learn to read at 7. And what they found was those who started later, by the age of 11, were reading at the same level as the children who had started at 5, but the children who started later were more likely to read for pleasure and had better text comprehension by the age of 11 than the children who had started earlier. And then a second study within the UK looking at summer-born children. In the UK, because all children start schooling at the beginning of the year when they're going to be 5, some children start very young when they're just 4, and those children do significantly worse. But the really interesting finding is that that is a consequence of the very early start of schooling in the UK. In countries where the start date is later, you don't get this impact of the birth date for the youngest children. Okay, so that's just a flavour of some of the studies of the consequences of starting children starting at school, formal instruction, at different ages. Essentially, if the take-home message is if the Polish government is wanting to change school starting age from 7 to 6, there is no evidence to suggest that that's going to have any effect. The only likely effect is that children from disadvantaged backgrounds will do worse because of the emotional damage done to them in the early years, because of anxiety and because of lack of confidence. Of course, the other consequence of lowering the school starting age is that you reduce the number of years that the children have in kindergarten experiencing a play-based introduction to their education. And here again are just a selection of studies that have looked at the impact of having children having an extended period of high-quality play-based kindergarten experience compared to having a shorter period of that and a more instructional approach to their preschool education. So we've got a study from the USA, a study within the UK, and a study in Germany, all of which compared in different ways a play-based kindergarten experience with an instructional approach, and in every single case, and these very often quite large studies, the long-term effects were beneficial for the children who'd had more of a play-based preschool experience. So why is an introduction to formal instruction likely to be counterproductive? So in summary, we can say that the requirement to learn, for young children to learn through formal instruction before they have the mental equipment to do so, leads to an early experience of play, of failure and disengagement from the educational process, and the reduction of the extent of crucial preparatory play-based informal experiences. So in the second half of the talk today, I want to just briefly review some of what we know about how children learn through play. And in this slide, again, I won't go into the details, but in this slide, I have listed just a selection of the now quite considerable body of evidence in this regard, and this is coming from a whole range of different disciplines of study. So here we have evidence from evolutionary psychology, looking at play in animals, and so on. We have evidence from anthropology, looking at play in less developed cultures, in hunter-gatherer societies. We have evidence from neuroscience, looking at the impact of playful behaviour on the development of the brains of simple mammals. And we have an increasing body of evidence from developmental psychology, starting to show the kinds of crucial skills that children are learning, principally to do with language development and with what we call self-regulation, which are crucial to academic achievement and which are developed most powerfully within playful experience. Okay, so let's just have a look in a little bit more detail about what kinds of play young children engage in and why all of these are valuable. I have, in my own work, analysed the literature on play and learning and suggested that there are broadly 5 types of play, which you can see listed here: physical play, play with objects, symbolic play, pretense, and games with rules. So let's have a look at each of these just briefly in turn. I should explain that these are organised in terms of the evolutionary development of these types of play. So the first type of play, physical play, is a type of play that you see in many, all mammals and even some reptiles, is very early emergence in evolution, and the first type of play that you'll see young children engaging in. So within physical play, essentially there are 2 types. You have various types of exercise play, and we see an example here of children swinging and climbing, and they do all sorts of other things too. And basically, obviously, they're developing their strength and endurance and their whole body and fine motor coordination through this kind of play. Mm-hmm. And the other type of physical play is what we call rough and tumble. I'm sure you've all done this when you were children. You roll around with your siblings or your mum and dad or your pets, and then when you get to be a teenager or a young adult, you roll around with the person you fall in love with. And this rough and tumble play seems to be very important for children's emotional development and their social skills. And all these types of physical play, of course, require resourcing in kindergartens, mainly, of course, in outdoor provision of all kinds of play apparatus. So now we come on to the second type of play to evolve. You see some of our closest relatives, some of the primates and great apes engage in play with objects, and certainly we do it, young children do it, to an enormous extent. It starts out as simple sensory play, picking up objects, putting them in your mouth, dropping them, seeing what noise they make and so on, but gradually develops into sorting behaviour and then into building and making, as we see in the pictures illustrated here. And this type of play turns out to be extremely important for developing children's thinking and reasoning, their problem solving, their creativity. And one of the phenomena that one sees when children are playing with this type of play is that they engage in self-commentary. They engage in what we call private speech, where they talk about what they're doing all the time as they're doing it. I'm sure you will have seen this phenomena. Adults do it too, actually, when they're trying to do something difficult. I imagine some of you find yourselves saying things out loud when you're trying to solve a difficult problem. And this is very connected with what we call self-regulation, which is children's developing ability to be in control of their own cognitions and emotions. Okay, so now we come on to the types of play that only human beings engage in, only human children. And the first one of those is we do a lot of play with the means of communication and expression. So we play with language, we play with words, we play with drawing, we play with sounds and so on, all these different symbolic systems that human beings use. Children's drawings are a particular joy, I think, and something I've always really been fascinated by. And I've picked one of my very favourite children's drawings to show you here today. This is a man and his dog. Just to be clear, this is the man, and this looks like a spider, but it's actually the dog. But you notice that you can tell they belong together because they have the same face and the same hairstyle. And this kind of play is very important in terms of, we know that if you want to support a young child's early language development, which of course is absolutely crucial to the whole of the rest of their educational career, the best way to do that, and many studies have shown this, is to play around with language with them, make up silly words, silly rhymes, silly songs, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, probably one of the commonest and very much researched forms of play, which is pretense, where children either pretend an object is something different to what it actually is, or they pretend they are somebody different to who they are. Sometimes they have imaginary friends who they just make up, and eventually this develops into making up stories, making up adventures, and developing children's narrative and storytelling skills. But it also turns out that this particular sort of play, because it's often social, is a context within which children are learning all sorts of friendship skills involved in, for example, regulating their emotions and their behaviour. And then the last developing form of play that you see emerging in children, probably in their third or fourth year, they start to be able to play games with rules. And these might be physical games, they might be board games. These days they might be games on their iPad or their computer. But one of the really interesting aspects of this, and that tells us what this is really about, is that, of course, with many of these games, the children are making up their own game and making up their own rules. And actually, if you watch young children when they're playing these kinds of games, often they spend more time discussing the rules and arguing about the rules than they do actually playing the game. So, to conclude, Anthony Pellegrini, who's an American academic who has probably done some of the most important research in this area, concludes that a number of features of all kinds of playful activity make it particularly valuable in terms of early learning. The focus when children are playing, or when we're all playing, tends to be on means rather than ends. So you can try things out in a safe context. There are no consequences, you can't get it wrong. And within the context of play, he argues that children can endlessly try out new behaviours, exaggerate, modify, abbreviate or change the sequence of behaviours, endlessly repeat slight variations of behaviours and so on. And this is precisely how you develop any kind of strategic abilities in relation to any kinds of task. And from an evolutionary point of view, you can see that playfulness has been selected for. We are a wildly successful species because we are so playful. It's essential to our nature as human beings, and it helps our near neighbours, the primates, to develop problem-solving skills that they have, but in humans it supports the whole gamut of higher-order cognitive and social-emotional skills that we possess. So when we think about the importance of play, it's important to recognise that play is often characterised, possibly by our politicians, as something which is essentially unimportant and trivial, whereas in fact, on the contrary, it's one of the highest achievements of human beings, and it forms the basis for the development of language, the arts, culture, science, mathematics and technology, and supports key developmental mechanisms. So just to come back to the international context again, there was a very, very important summit in South Korea just literally a few weeks ago, at which the UN set out the Sustainable Development Goals internationally for the next 15 years. We had what were called the Millennium Goals that were set in the year 2000, and they set goals for what countries across the world were supposed to achieve in terms of alleviating poverty, dealing with climate change, but also, importantly, providing access to education for young children. We now have a shift in the Sustainable Development Goals, as they're now called, towards providing high quality in early childhood education. And if Poland and any other country wish to work towards these goals, it's quite clear that they need to do two things. First of all, they need to provide kindergarten of a high quality for children between the ages of 3 and 6. This needs to be play-based, full of stimulating resources to support a wide range of play experiences along the lines I've indicated. And in order to do that at high quality, you need ideally graduate trained, professionally trained staff and very good adult-child ratios. And you also, of course, in order to give sufficient years of high-quality kindergarten, you need to delay the entry to school until the age of 7. Now, these have all been educational and psychological arguments, but if your government won't listen to those, maybe they'll listen to the economic arguments. And we have several studies now across the world showing that actually investing in early childhood education returns the most gains just in straightforward economics. So this is a particular study done in the United States, and it compared children who were in what was called a high scope study, which is a very play-based, highly structured, very high quality early childhood intervention, preschool, with children who were not in that program but were in a standard instruction-based preschool experience. And so here are just a range of the outcomes from that study when the children who had attended these programs as 4 and 5-year-olds had gone right through their education and right through university and were actually 27 years of age. So the children in the program, in the high quality play-based kindergarten, as you can see, achieved significantly higher high school grades. They were very significantly less likely to have been arrested for any criminal activity. They were very significantly likely to be earning a good salary. They were very significantly likely to have had less involvement with any kind of social services support, and they were about somewhere between 2 and 3 times more likely to own their own house. And in fact, it was estimated from this study, and there have been other studies like this which have come up with similar figures, that for every dollar that the American government invested in this high quality preschool experience, they actually saved $7 in the reduced costs that flow from the various differences that you can see. So I'm not a politician, but it would seem to me that in the 21st century, when for any country in the world now, the biggest piece of economic capital they have are the people and the skills that those people have, at a time like this to be reducing the very thing that seems to be the most powerful support for developing a highly skilled, well-educated workforce, i.e. high quality early childhood education, to be reducing that seems to be very foolhardy. So it just remains for me to thank you for listening and to encourage you to stand up for evidence-based, high-quality early childhood education that works, and to support the parents' movement within Poland that is trying to convince your politicians that this is the sensible thing to do. Thank you very much.